In the roaring heart of the MGM Grand Arena, a 65-year-old karate master sat quietly, seemingly too old and too calm to be drawn into chaos. A celebration of boxing turned volatile when Mike Tyson, drunk on victory and bravado, called Chuck Norris's life's work fake fighting. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical Hollywood star. For over 20 years, he had been an undefeated world karate champion, respected worldwide for his mastery of precision strikes and his ability to dismantle opponents with technique rather than brute force. When Tyson slammed his glove against the canvas and demanded Norris prove himself, he had no idea he was summoning a storm he couldn't contain. Norris stepped into the ring, every movement deliberate, and unleashed a clinical calm that turned Tyson's aggression into his undoing. What began as a mockery under the neon lights would become a clash of philosophies. The MGM Grand, and everyone who witnessed it, would never forget the night arrogance was humbled by discipline. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The punch landed with a sickening thud that echoed through the MGM Grand Arena. Bodies shifted forward in unison as the veteran fighter's legs buckled beneath him, his mouthguard flying in a perfect arc through the spotlights. The crowd's collective gasp transformed into a roar that shook the rafters as the referee dove between the fighters, waving his arms frantically. "It's over! It's over!" The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers, barely audible above the frenzy. Mike Tyson finishes him in the second round with that devastating right hook. The fallen fighter lay sprawled on the canvas, medical staff already rushing toward him. But Tyson wasn't watching. He paced the perimeter of the ring, arms raised high, his muscular frame glistening under the arena lights as he soaked in the adoration of 20,000 screaming fans. "Iron Mike! Iron Mike!" The chant rippled through the crowd, growing louder with each repetition. Cameras flashed like lightning storms as Tyson climbed the turnbuckle, beating his gloved fists against his chest. His face, a mask of primal intensity even in victory, broke into a wide grin as he surveyed his domain. This was Las Vegas Fight Night, and he owned every inch of it. "Ladies and gentlemen," the ringside announcer called out, his voice carrying the practiced dramatics that fight fans had come to expect. "Your winner by knockout, and still the most dangerous man on the planet, Iron Mike Tyson." The arena erupted again. Some fans stood on their seats. Others pounded the railings. The energy was electric, primal, intoxicating, a celebration of raw power and the beautiful violence that had made boxing the sweet science and Mike Tyson its most fearsome practitioner. In the VIP section, celebrities and high rollers mingled, champagne flutes in hand. Most were on their feet, caught in the momentum of the moment. But in the front row, one man remained seated, his posture relaxed, yet somehow perfectly composed. Chuck Norris. At 65, Norris carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had nothing to prove. His weathered face betrayed little emotion as he watched the spectacle unfold. Unlike the entourages surrounding other VIPs, Norris sat with just two companions, a middle-aged man who had once been his student and a younger fighter currently training at his dojo. He wore a simple black blazer over a crisp white shirt. No tie. Nothing flashy. Nothing that called for attention. His student leaned over. "That was quick," he said, voice tinged with professional appreciation rather than fan-like awe. Norris nodded once. "Power," he replied simply, "but undisciplined." Inside the ring, the medical team helped the defeated fighter to his feet. The man wobbled slightly, eyes still unfocused, as they guided him toward his corner. Tyson, meanwhile, had grabbed the microphone from the announcer, breathing heavily, sweat streaming down his face. That's how it's done, he shouted, his voice carrying the distinctive lisp that had become as much his trademark as his devastating left hook. That's real fighting right there. Not dancing around power. Pure power. The crowd roared their approval, feeding his already swelling ego. Tyson stalked around the ring like a caged predator, basking in the noise, the lights, the worship. This was his religion: dominance, intimidation, destruction. Not just winning, but conquering. Who else wants some? He taunted, playing to the cameras. Who else thinks they can step in here with the baddest man on the planet? The commentators at ringside laughed nervously, unsure where this was heading but knowing good television when they saw it. Mike Tyson. Ladies and gentlemen, the play-by-play announcer said into his headset. Always unpredictable. Always electric. Always dangerous, his colleague added. That poor guy never knew what hit him. That's 43 knockouts now for Tyson in this remarkable comeback run. In his corner, Tyson's trainers waited with towels and water. But he wasn't ready to be tended to yet. The adrenaline coursing through his veins demanded more. More adulation. More conquest. More proof of his supremacy. His eyes scanned the crowd hungrily, looking for something. Someone to focus his energy on. That's when he saw him. Chuck Norris. Seated calmly, watching without reaction. Something flashed in Tyson's eyes, a spark of recognition followed by a darker gleam. He pointed directly at Norris, the microphone still clutched in his other hand. Hey! Hey! You! His voice boomed through the arena. Chuck Norris, right? The Karate Man? A murmur swept through the crowd as heads turned toward the VIP section. Camera operators swiveled, finding Norris and projecting his image onto the massive screens hanging above the ring. Norris remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged. Decades of martial arts training had taught him to control his reactions, to never reveal his thoughts to an opponent. He simply met Tyson's gaze steadily. Yeah, I see you sitting there all quiet, Tyson continued, gaining momentum. Mr. Karate Master with all those fancy movie kicks. The crowd's energy shifted, uncertainty mixed with excitement. This was unscripted, unexpected. The kind of moment that made live events worth the price of admission. You know what I think about all that karate stuff? Tyson was fully committed now. Prowling along the ropes closest to where Norris sat. I think it's bullshit. Movie fighting. Fake. A collective intake of breath rippled through the arena. The commentators fell silent, unsure how to narrate this sudden turn. On the giant screens, Norris's expression remained unchanged, almost serene in its stillness. Real fighting is this! Tyson pounded his gloved fists together. Power against power. Not that dancing around, touching each other with your feet nonsense. Someone in the crowd shouted, Tell him, Mike. Others laughed nervously. The atmosphere crackled with tension. The ring announcer moved forward, clearly hoping to reclaim his microphone and steer the night back on script, but Tyson waved him off aggressively. I'm not finished, he barked, before turning his attention back to Norris. You want to know the difference between us? I'm real. What I do is real. All that stuff you do, that's for movies. For make-believe. In the VIP section, Norris's former student shifted uncomfortably. Chuck, he began. But Norris raised his hand slightly, a small gesture that carried the weight of command. It's fine, Norris said quietly. Let him talk. But Tyson wasn't just talking anymore. He was performing, feeding off the crowd's energy, building towards something. He pointed at Norris again. I heard you were supposed to be some kind of champion. World karate champion or whatever. But that's not real fighting. Come in here. He slapped the canvas with his glove. "Where it's real. Show me what those karate chops can do against this." He raised his fists again. The crowd's reaction was immediate and divided. Some cheered Tyson on, caught up in his bravado. Others muttered disapprovingly, recognizing the disrespect being shown to a legend. Near the back of the arena, someone started a faint chant. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" The commentators finally found their voices. "Well, this is unexpected," the play-by-play man said carefully. Mike Tyson apparently challenging Chuck Norris, the martial arts legend. "Disrespectful is what it is," his colleague replied. "Norris is a 6-time world karate champion. He's not some actor playing dress-up. But he is 65 years old," the first commentator noted. "And this is clearly just Tyson being Tyson. There's no way." He stopped mid-sentence as something changed in the arena. The Chuck chant had grown louder, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. And on the big screen, something was happening. Chuck Norris was standing up. His movement was unhurried, deliberate. A study in controlled precision. He buttoned his blazer with one smooth motion, his eyes never leaving Tyson. The crowd's chanting intensified. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" Even from across the arena, even through the cacophony of 20,000 voices, something passed between the two men, a silent acknowledgement that transcended the spectacle around them. For the briefest moment, uncertainty flickered across Tyson's face. But he recovered quickly, his trademark grin spreading wider as he beckoned Norris toward the ring. "Come on then!" he shouted into the microphone. "Let's see what you got, old man." As if on cue, a spotlight swung to illuminate Norris's path to the ring. The crowd was fully invested now. Phones raised to capture whatever came next. The world was watching. Chuck Norris took one step forward, then another. Each movement deliberate. Each step bringing the arena closer to a moment no one had anticipated, but everyone now craved. The commentators' voices rose with excitement and disbelief. "Ladies and gentlemen, I can't believe what we're seeing." Chuck Norris appears to be accepting Mike Tyson's challenge. "This can't be happening. This can't be sanctioned." But in that electric moment, with the crowd on its feet and history seemingly unfolding before their eyes, rules and sanctions seemed distant concerns. Two legends, two disciplines, two philosophies of fighting were about to collide. Chuck Norris continued his measured approach to the ring, his face a study in calm determination. Mike Tyson bounced on his toes, adrenaline and arrogance radiating from every pore. Las Vegas had seen its share of spectacles, but nothing like what was about to unfold. The path to the ring seemed to stretch endlessly as Chuck Norris moved forward with measured steps. Each foot placed deliberately, shoulders relaxed, hands loose at his sides. Not a hint of hurry or concern crossed his weathered features. His eyes sharp, focused, unblinking, remained fixed on Mike Tyson, who continued to pace the canvas like a caged predator. The MGM Grand had fallen into an eerie rhythm, the thunderous chant of "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" punctuated by moments of breathless anticipation. Spectators scrambled for better positions, phones raised high to capture what might become the most unexpected confrontation in combat sports history. "I can't believe this is happening," the play-by-play announcer whispered into his microphone, his professional detachment momentarily abandoned. "Chuck Norris is actually approaching the ring." "Someone needs to stop this," his colleague replied. "Norris is 65 years old. Tyson is in his prime, fresh off a knockout. This isn't some movie stunt." But no one moved to intervene. Not the security personnel stationed at regular intervals throughout the arena. Not the Nevada Athletic Commission officials who should have been enforcing the rules. Not even Tyson's own trainers, who watched with a mixture of confusion and growing concern. The collective breath of 20,000 people hung in the air, suspended in the space between spectacle and madness. Inside the ring, Tyson's initial swagger began to waver, almost imperceptibly. Perhaps it was the steady approach of Norris, whose calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to his own frenetic energy. Perhaps it was the shifting mood of the crowd, whose chants for Norris grew louder with each passing second. Or perhaps it was the dawning realization that his impulsive challenge was about to be answered. "Come on, old man," Tyson shouted again, but his voice carried a fraction less conviction. "Let's see what you got." Norris reached the ring apron, where a security guard stood uncertainly. With a slight nod from Norris, the man stepped aside, allowing him to climb the short stairs. Another security guard moved to open the ropes, hesitated, then proceeded when Norris gave another subtle nod. The former student who had accompanied Norris rose from his seat, concern etched across his face. "Chuck," he called out, "this isn't necessary." For the first time since standing, Norris broke his gaze from Tyson. He turned slightly, offering his student a small, reassuring smile, the kind of expression that conveyed decades of understanding in a single glance. Then, he returned his attention to the task at hand. As Norris ducked between the ropes, entering the squared circle with the same quiet dignity he brought to all aspects of his life, the referee moved toward center ring. The official, a veteran of countless championship bouts, looked utterly lost, torn between protocol and the unprecedented situation unfolding before him. "Mr. Norris," he began, his voice barely audible above the crowd's fervor, "I can't allow this. There's no sanction, no medical clearance." "It's all right," Norris replied, his voice low and measured. "I understand the situation." The referee glanced nervously between Norris and Tyson, then toward the commission officials at ringside, who appeared equally paralyzed by indecision. Tyson, meanwhile, had handed the microphone to his corner man and was now being fitted with a fresh mouthguard. His trainers worked quickly, re-securing his gloves, whispering urgent advice that he seemed to barely register. His focus remained locked on Norris, who stood calmly in the neutral corner, removing his blazer and handing it to the referee. Beneath the jacket, Norris wore a simple white dress shirt. He rolled up the sleeves methodically, exposing forearms corded with lean muscle, a testament to decades of disciplined training that age had diminished but not erased. "You gonna fight in your church clothes, old man?" Tyson called out, finding his bravado again. "No gloves? No protection?" Norris finished rolling his sleeves, then loosened his collar slightly. "I don't need gloves," he said, his voice so quiet that only those in the immediate vicinity could hear him. Yet somehow the statement carried throughout the arena, hushing the crowd momentarily. In the sudden silence, the ring announcer, professional to his core, stepped into the center of the ring, microphone raised. If this bizarre confrontation was happening, at least he would frame it properly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing through the arena, "we have an unprecedented situation here tonight." He paused, searching for words adequate to the moment. In this corner, fresh from his knockout victory, the former heavyweight champion of the world, the most feared puncher in boxing, Iron Mike Tyson. The crowd roared, though with less uniformity than before. Some sections cheered wildly, while others remained pointedly silent. "And in this corner," the announcer continued, sweeping his arm toward Norris, "a true martial arts legend, 6-time undefeated world karate champion, star of film and television, Chuck Norris." The eruption that followed dwarfed the previous response. The "Chuck" Chant resumed with renewed vigor, drowning out any remaining support for Tyson. On the giant screen suspended above the ring, Norris's impassive face stared back at 20,000 screaming fans, his expression betraying nothing of his thoughts. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. At ringside, the commentators struggled to provide context for what they were witnessing. For those just joining us, the play-by-play man said, his voice strained with disbelief, Mike Tyson has, in effect, challenged Chuck Norris to an impromptu bout following his scheduled victory tonight. And incredibly, Norris appears to have accepted. This is madness, his partner interjected. Norris is a karate champion, yes, but he's well into his 60s. Tyson is 30 years younger, in peak fighting condition, and just displayed his devastating power minutes ago. And yet, the first commentator replied, there's something about Norris's demeanor. He doesn't seem concerned in the slightest. In the center of the ring, the referee called both men together for instructions. Tyson bounced aggressively on the balls of his feet, shadowboxing, throwing occasional glares at Norris, who stood perfectly still, hands clasped loosely in front of him. Listen, the referee said, looking primarily at Norris. I don't know what you two think you're doing, but if I let this happen, there have to be rules. This is a boxing ring, not a... I understand, Norris interrupted quietly. Boxing rules are fine, Tyson snorted. Hear that? Boxing rules. No kicking, no karate chops. He mimicked a exaggerated karate motion. Just these. He raised his gloved fists. Mr. Tyson, the referee continued. You've already competed tonight. You're still wearing your gloves from the sanctioned bout. If this, whatever this is, proceeds, I expect clean fighting. No low blows, no rabbit punches. At my command, you stop. Understood? Tyson nodded impatiently, still bouncing, still staring at Norris, who had not moved a muscle during the referee's instructions. Mr. Norris, the referee turned again to the martial artist, concern evident in his expression. Are you certain about this? Without proper protection? I'm certain, Norris replied simply. The referee sighed, recognizing the futility of further protest. Touch gloves, he instructed. Tyson thrust his gloves forward aggressively. Norris reached out with open palms, lightly touching the leather surface of Tyson's boxing gloves with a respectful nod. The contrast in their approaches could not have been more stark. Tyson all bottled violence and barely contained fury. Norris, the embodiment of calm control. As they separated and retreated to their respective corners, a strange electricity filled the arena. Every eye was fixed on the ring, every breath held in anticipation. In living rooms and bars across the world, viewers who had tuned in for a regular boxing match found themselves witnesses to something unprecedented. In his corner, Tyson's trainers made final adjustments to his mouthguard and gloves. Their faces, masks of concern. Mike, listen. His head trainer hissed urgently. Don't underestimate him. He might be old, but... Shut up, Tyson snapped, his eyes never leaving Norris. This ain't gonna take long. In the opposite corner, Norris stood alone. He took one deep breath, then another, centering himself. To the untrained eye, he might have appeared to be doing nothing at all, but those familiar with martial arts would have recognized the subtle shifting of weight, the almost imperceptible adjustments in stance, a master preparing his body and mind for combat. Among the spectators, Norris's former student watched with growing apprehension. Yet mixed with his concern was something else, a memory of Norris's teachings years ago. True power doesn't shout. It whispers. And when necessary, it acts. The timekeeper struck the bell. A single, clear tone that cut through the arena's tension. In his corner, Tyson's trainer whispered one final instruction. Make it quick, but be careful. In the opposite corner, Norris simply exhaled slowly and stepped forward. Mike Tyson burst from his corner like a force of nature, closing the distance with the explosive speed that had made him legendary. His opening left hook whistled through the air with devastating intent. 20,000 voices held their breath as the blow approached its target. Chuck Norris took a single, precise step to his right. The punch missed by millimeters. The arena erupted as Tyson's opening salvo sliced through empty air, where Chuck Norris's jaw had been a fraction of a second earlier. The boxer's momentum carried him forward, forcing him to reset his footing before spinning back to face his opponent. His eyes widened, slightly surprise mixed with irritation. Norris hadn't counterattacked. He stood just out of range, his posture relaxed yet perfectly balanced, hands positioned in a loose guard that seemed almost casual compared to boxing's traditional tight defenses. His breathing remained steady, his expression unchanged. Only his eyes sharp, assessing, completely focused, betrayed the intensity behind his calm exterior. Didn't expect that, did you? The color commentator observed. Norris just made Iron Mike miss by the narrowest margin possible. That wasn't luck, folks. That was timing and distance management at the highest level. Tyson advanced again, more measured this time. He fired a probing jab, testing Norris's reactions. The martial artist deflected it with an open palm, not blocking but redirecting, guiding the punch past his shoulder with minimal effort. Tyson followed with a thunderous right cross aimed at Norris's midsection. Again, a subtle shift in position allowed Norris to avoid the full force of the blow, though the glove grazed his side. "Stand still and fight," Tyson growled through his mouthguard, frustration mounting as his target continued to elude him. Norris didn't respond verbally. Instead, for the first time since the bell rang, he initiated action, a lightning-fast palm strike to Tyson's lead shoulder that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. It wasn't delivered with full power, more a demonstration than an attack, but the precision was undeniable. Tyson's arm momentarily dropped from the impact. The crowd gasped, then erupted again. The chants for Norris grew louder. "Did you see that?" the play-by-play announcer exclaimed. Norris just touched Tyson's shoulder and immediately created distance again. "That's karate fundamentals right there, strike and retreat." "I'm more impressed by the speed," his colleague replied. At 65, Norris just landed on the quickest heavyweight in boxing. And notice he didn't go for Tyson's head or try to hurt him. That was a point-fighting touch, the kind that would score in karate competition. Inside the ring, Tyson's initial cockiness had evaporated, replaced by the focused intensity that made him boxing's most feared predator. He recognized now that this wouldn't be the easy humiliation he had anticipated. He tightened his guard and began cutting off the ring systematically, limiting Norris's movement options. "Now, we're seeing the real Mike Tyson," the commentator observed. "He's hunting, using the ring geography to trap Norris against the ropes." Norris recognized the strategy immediately. Rather than retreat, however, he moved subtly toward Tyson, not aggressively but with purpose, disrupting the boxer's timing. As Tyson launched another combination, Norris slipped inside his reach, executing a precise palm heel strike to Tyson's sternum before pivoting away. The blow wasn't devastating, but it was perfectly placed. Tyson felt the air rush from his lungs momentarily. His eyes narrowed, no longer underestimating his opponent. "You're fast for an old man," Tyson conceded between breaths, circling more cautiously now. "But let's see how you handle this." He exploded forward with the combination that had felled countless opponents, the jab slip hook that seemed to attack from multiple angles simultaneously. It was Tyson's signature, the sequence that boxing trainers around the world studied and feared. In the VIP section, Norris's student held his breath. He had seen this combination demolish world champions. Against a man in his 60s, regardless of his martial arts pedigree. But what happened next defied conventional fighting wisdom. Rather than retreat or cover up, Norris stepped directly toward the incoming storm. He moved inside the arc of Tyson's hook, neutralizing its power, while simultaneously executing a precise throat strike that stopped just short of full contact, a demonstration of control that left the boxing world stunned. Had Norris completed the technique with full force, the fight would have ended then and there. Instead, he pulled the strike at the last possible moment, making contact with just enough pressure to communicate what could have happened. The message was clear to everyone watching. "I could end this if I wanted to." Tyson froze momentarily, recognizing the deliberate restraint. For a fleeting second, something like respect flashed in his eyes. But it was quickly consumed by renewed determination. He reset his stance and closed in again, this time launching a flurry of body shots designed to wear down his older opponent. Norris absorbed some of these blows with subtle shifts in position that diffused their impact. Others he deflected entirely. His breathing remained steady, his movements economical. Where Tyson expended enormous energy with each explosive combination, Norris seemed to operate on a different principle altogether: minimum effort for maximum effect. At ringside, the officials watched in disbelief. What had begun as an apparent mismatch was revealing itself as something far more complex. A clash not just of fighting styles, but of fighting philosophies. "Ladies and gentlemen," the play-by-play announcer said, his voice hushed with awe, "we're witnessing something extraordinary here. Chuck Norris is demonstrating why martial arts masters have always maintained that technique can overcome raw power and youth." "It's not just technique," his colleague added. "It's experience." Norris is reading Tyson's intentions before Tyson even launches his attacks. That comes from decades of studying combat at the highest level. In the center of the ring, the dynamic continued to unfold. Tyson, growing increasingly frustrated, committed fully to a devastating uppercut, the same punch that had separated his previous opponent from consciousness. Norris not only avoided it but countered with a precise strike to Tyson's floating rib that caused the boxer to wince visibly. "You feel that?" Norris spoke for the first time since the bout began, his voice low and controlled. "That's the difference between hitting hard and hitting right." Something shifted in Tyson's expression, a flicker of doubt that hadn't been there before. For the first time in his career, he faced an opponent who seemed to operate according to principles he couldn't quite grasp. Power, speed, aggression. These were the currencies Tyson dealt in, but Norris traded in something else entirely. The crowd sensed the change too. The initial bloodlust that had fueled their excitement began to transform into something more reverent. They were no longer watching a fight. They were witnessing a lesson. In the VIP section, Norris's former student leaned forward, recognition dawning on his face. "He's teaching," he whispered to himself. "Even now he's teaching." Tyson regrouped, drawing on the deep reserves of fighting spirit that had made him a champion. He launched another assault, this time with more strategic intent, feinting high, then driving hard hooks to Norris's body. One connected solidly, and for the first time, Norris showed a reaction, a slight tightening around the eyes that acknowledged the impact. "Got you," Tyson growled, pressing his advantage with renewed confidence. He followed with a blistering combination that forced Norris to give ground. For a moment, it seemed the natural order was reasserting itself, youth and power, gaining ascendancy over age and technique. The crowd's energy surged again, sensing a potential turning point. But Chuck Norris had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of turning defense into offense. As Tyson committed to another powerful right hand, Norris executed a subtle weight shift that caused the boxer to overextend slightly. In that microscopic window of vulnerability, Norris countered with a short, sharp elbow strike to Tyson's temple, pulled at the last instant to prevent serious damage, but delivered with enough authority to snap the boxer's head sideways. Tyson staggered, momentarily disoriented. It wasn't the power of the blow that had affected him, but its precision and unexpectedness. He had never felt anything quite like it in the boxing ring. The referee stepped forward, concerned, but Tyson waved him off aggressively. "I'm fine," he insisted, though his eyes told a different story. For the first time in the encounter, real uncertainty had taken root. Chuck Norris retreated to neutral space, hands returning to their relaxed guard position. Not a drop of sweat marred his brow, not a hair was out of place. His breathing remained as steady as when the bell had first rung. It was as if he existed in a different relationship to physical exertion itself. The contrast with Tyson could not have been more stark. The boxer's body glistened with sweat. His breathing had grown heavier, and frustration radiated from every tense muscle. He had expected to humiliate an aging martial arts star. Instead, he found himself being systematically dismantled by principles he'd dismissed as movie fighting. In that moment, something fundamental changed in the arena. The spectators, the officials, even the commentators fell silent, sensing they were witnessing something transcendent, not just a physical confrontation but a philosophical one. Power versus precision, aggression versus control, youth versus experience, arrogance versus humility. The timekeeper signaled the 1-minute warning. In a sanctioned boxing match, this would mark the approaching end of the first round. But this was no ordinary bout, and everyone present understood instinctively that there would be no second round. Whatever was to be decided between these two men would be decided now. Tyson gathered himself for one final assault, a last opportunity to validate his beliefs, to prove that raw power would always triumph over what he perceived as esoteric martial arts philosophy. Chuck Norris sensed the coming storm and centered himself accordingly. In his eyes was neither fear nor arrogance, only complete presence, absolute focus on the moment at hand. As Tyson launched forward with everything he had left, 20,000 people leaned forward in their seats, knowing they were about to witness the culmination of this unexpected collision of worlds. The final exchange would become the stuff of fighting legend. Mike Tyson surged forward with the ferocity that had defined his career, a whirlwind of devastating hooks and uppercuts thrown with murderous intent. Each blow carried the weight of his pride, his frustration, his desperate need to reassert the primacy of his fighting philosophy. His face contorted with effort, veins bulging at his temples as he committed every ounce of his formidable power to this final offensive. "Tyson going all in," the play-by-play announcer shouted over the roaring crowd. "He's throwing everything he has at Norris." Time seemed to slow as Chuck Norris faced the onslaught. Where others saw chaos, he perceived patterns. Where others might have felt fear, he found clarity. The decades of rigorous training, of pushing his body and mind beyond conventional limits, crystallized into this singular moment. Norris moved with an economy of motion that bordered on the supernatural. He slipped the first hook by millimeters, deflected an uppercut with his forearm, pivoted away from a crushing right hand. Each defensive movement flowed seamlessly into the next, not separate techniques but a continuous expression of control. "This is unbelievable," the color commentator exclaimed. "Norris is making Tyson miss by fractions of an inch. I've never seen anything like this level of precision in defensive movement." The crowd's roar intensified with each exchange, the collective tension building to an almost unbearable pitch. In the VIP section, Norris's student watched with wide eyes, witnessing the physical manifestation of principles his master had tried to instill for years. True mastery isn't about dominating your opponent. It's about dominating yourself. Tyson, sensing his attacks being systematically neutralized, committed fully to a thunderous left hook, the same punch that had separated countless opponents from consciousness. He channeled everything into this single, decisive blow. His frustration, his pride, his absolute conviction that raw power must ultimately prevail. The hook cut through the air with devastating speed, aimed perfectly at Norris's jaw. The impact, if it connected cleanly, would end the confrontation instantly. "Oh! Tyson with a monstrous hook!" the announcer cried out. What happened next occurred so quickly that many witnesses would later debate exactly what they had seen. As Tyson's hook approached its target, Norris executed a subtle weight shift combined with a slight backward lean, not retreating, but creating just enough space to rob the punch of its full impact. Simultaneously, his right hand rose to intercept Tyson's wrist, redirecting the force of the blow upward. In that microscopic moment of imbalance, as Tyson's momentum carried him forward, Norris countered with a technique so precise and perfectly timed that it seemed to defy the laws of physics. A short, sharp strike, delivered with the ridge of his hand, found the pressure point where Tyson's jaw met his neck. It wasn't thrown with full power. Had it been, the damage would have been severe. Rather, it was delivered with exactly the force needed to create the intended effect, disrupting Tyson's nervous system momentarily. The boxer's eyes widened in shock. His legs buckled, not from unconsciousness but from a sudden neural interruption that his body had never experienced. He stumbled backward, arms flailing slightly as he fought to maintain his balance. The arena went absolutely silent. Every person present, from the front row to the highest tier, held their breath collectively. Even the commentators fell momentarily speechless, struggling to process what they had just witnessed. "Tyson is hurt!" the play-by-play man finally managed, disbelief coloring his voice. "Chuck Norris I don't even know how to describe what he just did. That was a Kyusho Jitsu technique," his colleague replied, equally stunned. "A pressure point strike to the trigeminal nerve cluster. I've seen demonstrations, but never in actual combat, never against a fighter of Tyson's caliber." In the center of the ring, Tyson regained his footing, shaking his head to clear the fog that had momentarily descended. His expression cycled rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and then most surprisingly, a grudging respect. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, his voice slightly slurred from the lingering effects of the strike. Chuck Norris remained in his relaxed stance, hands once again in their neutral guard position. "That," he replied calmly, "is what happens when you study an opponent rather than simply trying to overpower them." Tyson rolled his shoulders, reassessing the situation. The cocky showman who had started this confrontation was gone now, replaced by the disciplined fighter who had once dominated heavyweight boxing. His eyes narrowed with newfound respect and determination. "All right," he said, nodding slightly. "So you got tricks. I still got this." He raised his gloved fists, the leather gleaming under the arena lights. The crowd had recovered from its collective shock and now buzzed with a new energy, not the bloodthirsty excitement of earlier, but something approaching reverence. They were witnessing something transcendent, a confrontation that went beyond mere physical combat. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer whispered into his microphone, his professional detachment momentarily forgotten. What we're seeing here isn't just a clash of fighting styles. It's a clash of philosophies. In the ring, Tyson advanced again, but differently now. His movements were more measured, his footwork more deliberate. He had abandoned the wild flurries in favor of calculated pressure jabs designed to test Norris's defenses, feints meant to create openings. Norris adjusted accordingly. Where before he had primarily evaded, now he engaged more directly, meeting Tyson's reformed approach with subtle counters that demonstrated another dimension of his martial philosophy. A short palm strike disrupted Tyson's rhythm. A precise forearm deflection nullified a hook. A quick tap to the solar plexus reminded the boxer of his vulnerability. "Look at that control," the color commentator observed. Norris isn't trying to hurt Tyson. He's communicating through combat, showing rather than telling. In the VIP section, Norris's former student nodded in understanding. He had seen this before in the dojo, the master, using physical technique to impart deeper lessons, teaching through action rather than words. The arena had become a classroom, the ring a place of education rather than destruction. Tyson, to his credit, was learning quickly. After each exchange, he adjusted, adapted, seeking weaknesses in Norris's approach. His breathing had steadied somewhat, his movements becoming more efficient. The raw fighter was evolving before the crowd's eyes. "I never back down," Tyson declared between exchanges. Though the statement carried less bravado than before, it was simply a fact, an expression of the indomitable spirit that had carried him from the streets of Brooklyn to the pinnacle of boxing. "Backing down isn't the lesson," Norris replied calmly. "Slipping another jab. Control is." Frustration flashed across Tyson's face again. He launched a quick combination jab, cross, hook executed with textbook precision. Norris evaded the first two punches but allowed the third to graze his shoulder, demonstrating that even perfect technique could be countered with superior timing. "This is like watching a chess match at hyperspeed," the play-by-play announcer commented. "Every move has a countermove. Every attack creates vulnerability." Tyson reset once more, circling to his left. Sweat poured down his face, his breathing more labored now despite his efforts to control it. He had entered this confrontation fresh from one fight, but now found himself in a completely different kind of contest. One that taxed not just his body, but his understanding of combat itself. Norris, by contrast, showed minimal signs of exertion. His breathing remained measured, his movements as precise as when the encounter began. Decades of training in energy conservation, in the elimination of wasted motion, were on full display. "You can't keep this up forever, old man," Tyson said, searching for a psychological edge where physical advantages had failed him. "I don't need forever," Norris replied simply, "just now." The statement carried no arrogance, no challenge, just an expression of the martial artist's complete immersion in the present moment. Past and future had fallen away, leaving only the immediate reality of the encounter. Sensing a shifting momentum, Tyson committed to another offensive, a series of body shots designed to wear down his opponent's stamina. Several connected, the impact audible throughout the arena. Norris absorbed them with subtle adjustments in position that diffused some of their force, but the crowd could see that the blows had registered. "Tyson finding success to the body," the commentator noted. "Even Norris can't completely neutralize the raw power of those hooks." For a moment, it seemed the natural order might reassert itself, youth and strength, gaining advantage over age and technique. Tyson pressed forward, sensing opportunity, launching another flurry aimed at Norris's midsection. But Chuck Norris had spent a lifetime turning apparent vulnerability into opportunity. As Tyson committed to a particularly vicious liver shot, Norris executed a subtle hip rotation that caused the punch to glance off rather than land flush. Simultaneously, he countered with a lightning-fast strike to Tyson's exposed ribs, a blow delivered with just enough force to elicit a sharp intake of breath from the boxer. "Counter strike!" the announcer exclaimed. Norris making Tyson pay for that commitment. Tyson winced, but continued pressing forward, unwilling to cede momentum. He launched a looping right hand aimed at Norris's temple, a blow designed to end matters definitively. What happened next became the defining moment of the encounter. Instead of evading, Norris stepped directly into the punch's path. Before Tyson could process this unexpected movement, Norris had executed a perfect intercepting strike, his fist meeting Tyson's precisely at the midpoint of its trajectory. The collision neutralized the punch entirely, stopping it as effectively as if it had hit a concrete wall. The crowd gasped collectively. Even those with minimal fighting knowledge recognized they had just witnessed something extraordinary, a perfect application of physics and timing that defied conventional combat wisdom. "My God," the color commentator breathed. That was the intercepting fist technique, a cornerstone of Jeet Kune Do. Bruce Lee developed it, but I've never seen it executed so perfectly in an actual fight. In the ring, time seemed to freeze for a moment. Tyson stood with his arm extended, his punch neutralized in mid-flight, his expression one of complete disbelief. Norris remained perfectly balanced, his countering fist still pressed against Tyson's glove, his eyes locked with the boxer's. In that frozen moment, something passed between them, an understanding that transcended words, a recognition that went beyond the physical dimension of their encounter. Tyson saw in Norris's eyes not triumph or arrogance, but perfect clarity, the embodiment of martial arts principles he had dismissed as theoretical rather than practical. The spell broke as both men retracted their arms. Tyson stepped back, reassessing everything he thought he knew about fighting. The crowd, sensing a pivotal shift, fell into a hushed silence. "What you just felt," Norris said quietly, "isn't about age or strength. It's about understanding force, redirecting it, rather than opposing it directly." For once, Tyson had no quick retort. He studied Norris with new eyes, seeing beyond the aging exterior to the lifetime of knowledge it contained. In that moment, perhaps for the first time in his career, Mike Tyson confronted the possibility that his understanding of combat might be incomplete. The transformation was visible in his stance, in the way he carried himself as he circled more cautiously. The wild aggression that had defined his career gave way to something more measured, a fighter seeking to learn even as he sought victory. "You still think karate is fake?" Norris asked. No challenge in his voice, just a genuine question. Tyson's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in concentration. "I think," he replied slowly, "there's more to this than I knew." It wasn't a concession, but an acknowledgement, a first step toward a broader understanding. In the VIP section, Norris's students smiled slightly, recognizing the real victory taking place before their eyes. It wasn't about who could hurt whom. It was about expanding perspectives, challenging assumptions. As the encounter entered its final minute, both men seemed to recognize that the true purpose of their confrontation had already been fulfilled. The dynamic shifted subtly, less adversarial, more demonstrative. Tyson would attack. Norris would counter. Each exchange revealing principles of movement and energy that transcended their respective disciplines. The crowd, initially hungry for violence, now watched in appreciative silence, sensing they were witnessing something rare and valuable. A physical dialogue between masters that spoke to deeper truths about combat, about discipline, about respect. As the timekeeper signaled the 10-second warning, Tyson gathered himself, for one final exchange. He launched a perfectly executed combination jab, cross, hook, uppercut, each punch thrown with textbook technique rather than blind aggression. Norris met the challenge with equal precision, deflecting, redirecting, countering, a masterclass in defensive fighting. As Tyson's final uppercut sliced through the air, Norris executed a subtle sidestep, followed by a perfectly timed palm strike that stopped just short of Tyson's chin. The message was clear. I could end this if I chose to. Tyson recognized the deliberate restraint. Rather than reacting with anger, he nodded slightly, an acknowledgement between warriors. As the bell rang, signaling the end of their impromptu bout, both men stood facing each other in the center of the ring, neither triumphant nor defeated, but transformed by the encounter. The arena erupted into thunderous applause, not the bloodthirsty roar that accompanies a knockout, but something more profound. Appreciation for witnessing a moment of genuine martial truth. In that electric moment, as the crowd rose to their feet, Mike Tyson did something no one expected. He reached up and removed his mouthguard, then extended his gloved hand toward Chuck Norris. "Respect," he said simply. Norris took the offered hand without hesitation, clasping it firmly. Likewise. It was more than a perfunctory gesture of sportsmanship. It was a bridge between worlds that had seemed irreconcilable minutes earlier. An acknowledgement that true martial arts transcend style, transcend ego, transcend the artificial boundaries that separate one fighting philosophy from another. As they stood together in the center of the ring, hands clasped, the roar of the crowd washed over them. But in that moment, for both men, the noise seemed distant, secondary to the understanding they had reached through the universal language of combat. The referee approached, still uncertain how to officially conclude this unprecedented encounter. But some moments defy conventional resolution. This wasn't about victory or defeat. It was about truth, the kind that can only be discovered through direct experience. As Chuck Norris and Mike Tyson released their handshake and turned toward their respective corners, everyone present understood they had witnessed something that would be remembered long after conventional title fights had faded from memory. This wasn't the end of their story. In many ways, it was just the beginning. The aftermath unfolded in silence. As Tyson's final desperate punch missed its mark and Chuck Norris's perfectly timed counter left the boxer wobbling, the MGM Grand Arena held its collective breath. 20,000 spectators, who moments earlier had been a cacophony of cheers and jeers, now watched in stunned silence as history was being written before their eyes. Tyson steadied himself, blinking away the fog that had momentarily descended. His expression cycled rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and finally, most surprisingly, a flash of genuine respect. Standing before him was not just an aging martial arts star, but a living embodiment of principles he had dismissed as theoretical rather than practical. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, his voice carrying a new undercurrent of curiosity beneath the bravado. Norris remained in his balanced stance, hands returning to their neutral position. He replied calmly, "Is what happens when you study force rather than just apply it." The referee stepped between them, uncertain how to proceed in this unprecedented situation. But neither man seemed interested in continuing hostilities. Something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere. The confrontation had transcended physical combat to become a moment of exchange, of recognition. Tyson rolled his shoulders, reassessing. The cocky showman who had initiated this challenge was receding, replaced by the disciplined fighter who recognized he was witnessing something extraordinary. "You got skills, old man," he conceded, the statement carrying none of his earlier mockery. For real. The crowd, sensing this transformation, began to stir again. But this wasn't the bloodthirsty roar of before, it was something approaching reverence, an appreciation for witnessing a rare moment of genuine martial truth. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer whispered into his microphone, professional detachment momentarily forgotten, "I believe we're seeing something truly historic here tonight." Norris took a step forward, closing the distance between himself and Tyson. His movements remained fluid, controlled, precise, not threatening, but instructive. "Power without control is just chaos," he said, his voice low enough that only Tyson could hear him clearly. "And control without wisdom is just technique." Tyson's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in concentration. He was listening now, truly listening, perhaps for the first time in his combative career. "Show me," he said simply. What happened next became the defining image of the encounter. Instead of continuing the exchange of blows, Norris extended his open hand toward Tyson, not in a fighting stance but in a gesture of connection. After a moment's hesitation, Tyson reached out and clasped it. The arena erupted into thunderous applause, not the savage roar that accompanies a knockout, but something more profound. Appreciation for witnessing a moment of genuine transformation. "Respect," Tyson said. The single word, carrying more weight than any victory speech he had ever delivered. Norris nodded, his expression reflecting neither triumph nor condescension, only quiet acknowledgement of a bridge crossed, a connection formed where division had existed moments before. As they stood together in the center of the ring, hands clasped, the commentary team struggled to contextualize what they were witnessing. "In my 30 years covering combat sports," the play-by-play announcer said, his voice still tinged with awe, "I've never seen anything quite like this. What started as a seemingly reckless challenge has turned into, I don't even know how to describe it, a masterclass," his colleague suggested. "Not just in fighting technique, but in the true spirit of martial arts. This isn't about winning or losing anymore." In the VIP section, Norris's former student watched with a knowing smile. He had seen this pattern before, though never on such a grand stage. The master had allowed circumstances to unfold naturally, neither seeking nor avoiding confrontation, then transformed the energy of aggression into an opportunity for growth. As Norris and Tyson released their handshake and turned toward their respective corners, a strange electricity filled the arena. This wasn't the end of something, but the beginning. Not a conclusion, but an opening. Everyone present sensed it, from the front row to the highest tier. The referee approached, still uncertain how to officially conclude this unprecedented encounter. But some moments defy conventional resolution. This wasn't about victory or defeat. It was about truth, the kind that can only be discovered through direct experience. Tyson paused at the ropes, then turned back toward Norris. "We should talk," he said, the statement both a request and an acknowledgement. Norris nodded once, understanding perfectly what remained unspoken. As they exited the ring from opposite sides, the crowd continued to applaud, recognizing that they had witnessed something transcendent, not just a clash of fighting styles, but a demonstration of martial art's deepest purpose, the transformation of conflict into understanding, of opposition into growth. The lesson had been delivered, not through words, but through experience. And its impact would continue to resonate long after the lights in the arena had dimmed. Dawn broke over the Las Vegas Strip, painting the desert sky in hues of amber and gold. The neon glow that defined the city at night had faded, replaced by the stark clarity of morning light. Outside the MGM Grand, cleaning crews swept away the debris of the previous evening, erasing physical evidence of what had transpired. But some events cannot be swept away, they linger in memory. in conversation, in the subtle shift of perspectives. In his luxury suite at the Bellagio, Mike Tyson sat alone on the balcony, watching the sunrise. He had declined the customary post-fight celebrations, sending away even his closest handlers with uncharacteristic quietude. He needed space to process, to integrate, to understand. On the glass table beside him lay his phone, its screen illuminated with notifications, hundreds of messages, thousands of social media alerts, dozens of interview requests. The digital world was clamoring for his reaction, for his narrative of the previous night's events. But Tyson had nothing to give them. Not yet. The experience was still too raw, too profound to be packaged into sound bites or tweets. He raised his hand, studying the bruises forming on his knuckles, familiar marks from a lifetime of fighting. But this morning, they carried new significance. For the first time in his career, perhaps in his life, Tyson had encountered something his fists couldn't overwhelm, something his ferocity couldn't intimidate. Not because of physical limitation, but because of a fundamental misunderstanding of what true power entailed. A soft knock at the suite door interrupted his contemplation. Tyson sighed, assuming it was another member of his entourage, ignoring his request for solitude. "Not now," he called out. "Mr. Tyson," came the reply. "There's a delivery for you." The front desk said it's important. Curiosity overcame reluctance. Tyson rose from his seat, crossed the expansive suite, and opened the door. A hotel staff member stood holding a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. "Thank you," Tyson said, accepting the package and closing the door before the staff member could engage in conversation. Back on the balcony, he examined the parcel. No return address, no card, no indication of its origin. He unwrapped it carefully to reveal a hardcover book, Zen in the Martial Arts, by Joe Hyams. A simple bookmark protruded from its pages. Tyson opened to the marked passage and read, "The professional maintains a calm center. He understands that power comes not from external force, but from internal balance. The true master has nothing to prove because he has already proven everything to himself." Below the passage, handwritten in precise script, was a brief note. "When you're ready to learn more, CN." A phone number followed the initials. Tyson stared at the note for a long moment. Then, for the first time since the previous night's encounter, he smiled, not the fierce grin of combat or the performative smile of press conferences, but something more genuine, more reflective. He placed the book carefully on the table and turned his attention back to the sunrise. Something had begun, not ended, in that ring. A journey of understanding that would require more courage than any fight he had ever faced. Miles away, in a private training facility on the outskirts of Las Vegas, Chuck Norris moved through his morning routine. Despite the previous night's exertions, he maintained the discipline that had defined his life for over 5 decades. Each movement was precise, deliberate, an expression of the principles he had demonstrated in the ring. His former student, who had witnessed the confrontation with Tyson, watched from the doorway. "The media is going crazy," he said, holding up his phone. "Every sports channel, every news outlet, they're calling it the lesson. Some are saying it's the most significant moment in martial arts history since Bruce Lee." Norris continued his form without interruption. "They're missing the point," he replied calmly. "Which is that it wasn't about history or significance. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about one moment, one encounter, one opportunity to exchange truth." The student considered this. But the impact is undeniable. People are talking about martial arts philosophy who never gave it a thought before. They're questioning assumptions about age, about fighting styles, about what constitutes real strength. Norris completed his form and turned to face his student. That's valuable, he acknowledged. But secondary. What matters is what Tyson takes from it. What he does with the understanding he gained. Do you think he will? Do anything with it, I mean. He has a reputation for. Reputations, Norris interrupted gently, are what others believe about us. Character is what we know about ourselves. He smiled slightly. I saw something in his eyes last night. A recognition. A beginning. The student nodded, accepting the wisdom. He received your book? Uh, 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 uh. I saw something in his eyes last night. Yes. What happens next is his choice. Across Las Vegas, in gyms and dojos, in casino sportsbooks and hotel lounges, the conversation continued. Video clips of the confrontation had gone viral, spawning countless analyses, interpretations, and debates. Some focused on the technical aspects, the precision of Norris's movements, the effectiveness of his defensive strategy against Tyson's raw power. Others discussed the philosophical implications, the clash of fighting styles, the triumph of discipline over aggression, the demonstration that age need not diminish effectiveness when technique is perfect. But beneath the public discourse, a more personal story was unfolding. 3 days after the encounter, in a small, nondescript coffee shop far from the Strip, two men sat across from each other at a corner table. No entourages, no cameras, no audience, just Chuck Norris and Mike Tyson, face to face, in a different kind of arena. I appreciate you meeting me, Tyson said, his voice lacking its usual intensity. And the book? I've been reading it. Norris nodded. What do you think so far? It's challenging. Not the words themselves, but the ideas. Tyson tapped his fingers on the table, organizing his thoughts. I've spent my whole career, my whole life really, believing that power was everything. That intimidation and force were the only language that mattered. And now, Tyson met Norris's gaze directly. Now I'm not so sure. He leaned forward slightly. That thing you did, when you stopped my punch completely, I've never felt anything like that. It was like hitting nothing and everything at the same time. The intercepting fist, Norris explained. A principle more than a technique. Meeting force with redirection rather than opposition. Can you teach me that? Tyson asked, the question carrying none of his trademark bravado, just genuine curiosity. Norris considered the request carefully. I can show you the physical movement, he replied. But to truly understand it requires more than technical knowledge. It requires a shift in perception, seeing combat not as a contest of domination but as an exchange of energy. I want to learn, Tyson said simply. Not just the moves, but the other part. The control. The calm. I've never had that. Norris nodded, recognizing the sincerity in the request. It won't be easy, he warned. It goes against everything you've been taught, everything you've practiced. It will require you to question your fundamental approach to fighting, perhaps to life itself. I know. Tyson's expression revealed a vulnerability rarely seen by the public. But after what happened in that ring, I can't go back to how I was before. I need to understand. In that moment, in that quiet exchange far from the spotlight, the true significance of their confrontation became clear. It wasn't about who won or lost, wasn't about karate versus boxing, wasn't even about the spectacular display of skill that had captivated the world. It was about transformation, the moment when one warrior recognized in another a path toward greater understanding. We'll start tomorrow, Norris said, extending his hand across the table. Not with fighting but with fundamentals, breathing, centering, presence. Tyson took the offered hand, his grip firm, but no longer dominating. "Thank you," he said. The words, carrying a weight of sincerity that transcended conventional gratitude. As they parted ways outside the coffee shop, neither man was aware of the solitary figure watching from across the street, Norris's former student, who had followed out of concern for his master. What he witnessed was not the beginning of a rivalry, but of a mentorship, not a continuation of conflict, but the start of a journey toward mutual understanding. The student smiled to himself, recognizing the pattern that had defined Chuck Norris's approach to martial arts throughout his career. Turning confrontation into education, opposition into opportunity, aggression into growth. The encounter with Tyson hadn't been about defending karate's honor or proving personal superiority. It had been about creating the conditions for transformation, not just for Tyson but for everyone who witnessed it. Everyone who would hear the story. In the days and weeks that followed, the narrative evolved in unexpected ways. The initial media frenzy gave way to deeper analysis, to thoughtful consideration of what the encounter revealed about combat sports, about martial philosophy, about aging and adaptability. Training footage emerged, Norris guiding Tyson through basic kata, teaching him breathing techniques, introducing him to principles of energy, conservation, and efficient movement. The images confounded those who had expected ongoing animosity, but delighted those who understood the true spirit of martial arts. In dojos across the country, instructors reported a surge in new students, not just young people seeking fighting skills, but adults, looking for the kind of centered presence Norris had demonstrated in the ring. The contrast between Tyson's raw aggression and Norris's calm control had resonated far beyond fighting circles, touching something primal in the collective consciousness. 6 months after their confrontation, Tyson gave his first in-depth interview about the experience. Seated in the same dojo where he had been training with Norris, he spoke with a thoughtfulness that surprised those familiar with his earlier persona. "Fighting was always about domination for me," he explained to the interviewer. "About imposing my will. About being the strongest, the most feared. It worked in the ring, but not in life." He glanced toward Norris, who was demonstrating a technique to other students across the room. "What I'm learning now is different. It's about harmony instead of opposition. About efficiency instead of force." "Has it changed your view of boxing?" the interviewer asked. Tyson considered the question carefully. "Not changed so much as expanded," he replied. "Boxing is still beautiful in its way. But it's one perspective, one approach. What happened that night in the ring wasn't about boxing versus karate. It was about seeing beyond styles to principles. And those principles are? Control," Tyson said immediately. "Not of your opponent, but of yourself. Presence being fully in each moment, without anticipation or regret. Respect for yourself, for your opponent, for the art itself." He smiled slightly. "Things I used to dismiss as philosophical nonsense. Now I understand they're the foundation everything else is built on." The interview concluded with a demonstration Norris and Tyson moving through a series of paired exercises that showcased not competition, but collaboration. Not domination, but exchange. The footage went viral, inspiring countless discussions about redemption, about growth, about the capacity for change regardless of age or background. 1 year to the day after their historic confrontation, Chuck Norris and Mike Tyson stood together on a different stage, the grand opening of a youth center they had jointly established in one of Las Vegas's most underserved neighborhoods. The facility offered not just martial arts training but academic support, mentorship programs, and community services. As they cut the ribbon, surrounded by eager children and supportive community members, a reporter called out a question that had been asked countless times over the previous year. Who really won that night in the ring? Norris and Tyson exchanged glances. A silent communication born of months of shared training and growing mutual respect. We both did, Tyson answered finally. But not in the way most people think. He gestured toward the children gathered around them. And hopefully, so will they. In that moment, as cameras flashed and the crowd applauded, the true lesson of that extraordinary night was made manifest. It wasn't about victory or defeat, wasn't about which fighting style reigned supreme, wasn't even about the spectacular demonstration of skill and control that had captivated millions. It was about the possibility of transformation, the recognition that true strength lies not in dominating others, but in mastering oneself. That real power isn't measured in knockouts or championships, but in the ability to grow, to learn, to evolve beyond the limitations of ego and expectation. As the ceremony concluded and the children dispersed to explore their new facility, Norris and Tyson found a quiet moment away from the cameras and the crowd. "Did you ever imagine this?" Tyson asked, gesturing toward the center with its blend of boxing rings and karate mats, its library and computer lab, its walls adorned with principles from both Eastern and Western fighting philosophies. "When you stepped into that ring with me, did you see this coming?" Norris smiled, the genuine, unguarded expression of a man at peace with his place in the world. "Not specifically," he admitted. "But I've learned over the decades that when we approach confrontation with the right intention, what follows often transcends our expectations." "The right intention," Tyson repeated thoughtfully, "not winning or dominating." "Understanding," Norris clarified. "Seeing the moment for what it is rather than what ego demands it should be." A group of young teenagers approached cautiously, training gear in hand, eyes wide with recognition and admiration. One of them, a skinny boy with determined eyes, stepped forward. "Mr. Tyson, Mr. Norris," he said, his voice cracking slightly with adolescent nervousness. "Would you show us that move? From the fight? The one where—" He made an intercepting motion with his hand. The two masters exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "It's not just a move," Tyson said, surprising Norris with the depth of his response. "It's a principle. And to understand the principle, you need to understand yourself." Norris finished, nodding with approval at his student's progress. "But," Tyson added with a grin that recalled some of his old mischief but none of his former malice, "we can show you where the journey begins." As they moved toward the training area, surrounded by eager young students, the contrast between this moment and their first encounter couldn't have been more profound. Where there had been tension, now there was harmony. Where there had been opposition, now there was collaboration. Where there had been spectacle, now there was substance. In dojos and boxing gyms across the country, the ripple effects continued to spread. Trainers who had once dismissed other fighting disciplines began incorporating diverse techniques into their programs. Martial artists who had maintained rigid stylistic boundaries became more open to cross-training. The artificial divides between combat sports began to dissolve, not through compromise but through recognition of universal principles. Media coverage of the youth center's opening sparked renewed interest in the original confrontation. On sports commentary shows and podcasts, in magazine articles and documentary segments, the narrative evolved from sensationalism to significance. Fighting experts who had initially focused on the technical aspects began exploring the philosophical implications. Cultural commentators who had dismissed the encounter as mere spectacle recognized its deeper resonance. What made the Norris Tyson moment so powerful, one respected analyst observed, wasn't just the demonstration of skill across age barriers. It was the visible transformation it sparked, not just in Tyson, but in how we collectively view combat sports. It challenged our fixation on youth, on aggression, on dominance as the only measures of value. In his private dojo outside Las Vegas, Chuck Norris continued his morning routine much as he had for decades, moving through forms with the same precise attention, the same economy of motion, the same present moment awareness. But now he was rarely alone. Most mornings, Mike Tyson joined him. Still learning. Still struggling sometimes with the shift from external force to internal control, but committed to the journey. The hardest part? Tyson confessed during one such session, pausing to correct his stance under Norris's watchful eye. Isn't the physical technique. It's quieting the voice that still wants to prove something, to dominate, to be the best. Norris nodded, understanding the challenge intimately. That voice never completely disappears, he acknowledged. Even after 50 years of training. The difference is that, now, you recognize it for what it is. Just a voice, not a command. You can hear it without being controlled by it. Is that what you were doing that night in the ring? Tyson asked. Hearing the voice but not listening to it? Yes, Norris confirmed. When you challenged me, when you mocked karate, part of me, the ego, wanted to prove something, to defend, to dominate, but that part doesn't serve the greater purpose. Which is growth, understanding, the recognition that we're all on the same path, just at different points of the journey. Tyson absorbed this, as he had absorbed so many lessons over the past year, not just techniques but perspectives, not just movements but meanings. The man who had once defined himself by his capacity for destruction was learning, step by step, a different kind of strength. I'm grateful, he said simply. Not just for what you've taught me, but for that moment, for not giving me what I thought I wanted but what I actually needed. Norris placed a hand on his student's shoulder, a gesture of connection that transcended words. In that touch was the essence of what martial arts had always been meant to convey. Not separation but unity. Not opposition but harmony. Not conquest but evolution. Outside the dojo, the world continued to spin, new champions crowned, new records set, new spectacles captivating public attention. But something fundamental had shifted in the landscape of combat sports, in the understanding of what constituted true mastery, true strength, true power. It had begun with an impulsive challenge, with arrogance meeting humility in the center of a boxing ring on a night that seemed destined for controversy. It had transformed into something no one could have predicted, a moment of genuine connection, of shared truth, of mutual recognition that transcended the artificial boundaries of style and age and expectation. And in that transformation lay the most important lesson of all, that the greatest victories aren't won against others but against our own limitations, our pride, our fear, our attachments, our conditioning. That true strength isn't measured by who we can defeat but by what we can become. One evening, as the desert sun cast long shadows across the landscape, Norris and Tyson stood outside the youth center they had created together, watching children from diverse backgrounds practicing different fighting styles side by side, some in boxing gloves, others in karate gis, all learning from each other. Look at them, Tyson said softly. No divisions, no styles, just learning. Norris nodded, a quiet pride in his eyes. This is the legacy, he replied. Not what happened in that ring, but what grew from it. Not the moment of confrontation, but the lifetime of transformation it inspired. As they watched the next generation of fighters, children who would grow up without the artificial boundaries that had defined earlier eras, both men recognized that they had contributed to something larger than themselves, larger than their individual accomplishments, larger than the spectacular encounter that had brought them together. They had demonstrated, in the most visceral and visible way possible, that the true purpose of martial arts was not to separate, but to connect, not to destroy, but to build, not to diminish others, but to elevate ourselves, that the path of the warrior, properly understood, is not about conquest, but about transcendence. And in that understanding lay the ultimate victory, not of one fighter over another, not of one style over another, but of wisdom over ignorance, of growth over stagnation, of truth over illusion. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, casting the desert into twilight, Chuck Norris and Mike Tyson turned toward their separate vehicles, each carrying the day's lessons within them. No words were needed in parting. The connection forged between them transcended conventional expressions. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth, new moments to practice presence in the face of distraction. The journey would continue, as it always had, one breath at a time, one technique at a time, one insight at a time. But something had been set in motion that night in the ring, something that would continue to resonate through the worlds of combat sports and beyond, touching lives far removed from Las Vegas, inspiring transformations that neither man could fully anticipate or measure. And in that ongoing resonance lay the truest testament to what they had created together. Not just a memorable moment of sporting history, but a living example of martial arts' deepest purpose, the continuous evolution of human potential, the endless journey toward mastery, not of others, but of ourselves. As the stars emerged in the desert sky, that journey continued step by step, breath by breath, moment by moment, not toward some final destination, but toward deeper understanding, not toward ultimate conquest, but toward lasting peace, not toward perfect technique, but toward perfect presence. The lesson, like all true wisdom, had no end, only new beginnings. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.